Because my video series and interactions with apologist William Lane Craig totals to almost 2 hours worth of content, I wanted to cover some of the best objections to the moral argument for God's existence in their own smaller, easier to digest videos. To sum things up, here's the standard moral argument for God's existence. Premise 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2. Objective moral values and duties exist. Conclusion, therefore God exists. This video is going to cover a response to an objection apologists will always bring up against moral naturalism when debating the moral argument with atheists. The moral argument is about a philosophical topic known as moral ontology. If you're like the vast majority of people, you probably have no idea what that means. Moral ontology is about what kind of thing moral values are. Going over the 3 options available will probably help explain what I'm getting at. The first option is moral naturalism, the idea that moral facts reduce down to facts about the natural world. This is compatible with atheism and is generally what most atheists argue for. The second option is moral non-naturalism, the idea that moral facts are facts in a acausal reality. That is, objects that just exist as objects in some Platonic realm where they cannot causally interact with the natural world. Effectively, I'm talking about Platonism here. This is also compatible with atheism, and a few philosophers will defend this view today. The final category is moral supernaturalism, the idea that moral facts reduce down to facts about the supernatural beings, like God. This is not compatible with atheism, and is what the moral argument tries to establish. Now, in order for the moral argument to work, an apologist must assume a theory of ethics known as modified divine command theory. In philosophy, this is what is called a metaethical theory. That is a theory that attempts to explain what makes something morally valuable, and what constitutes our moral obligations. Modified divine command theory says that objective moral values are equivalent to God's nature, and that objective moral duties, that is, what we ought to do, morally speaking, are made up of God's divine commands to us. Typically, atheists will argue for some kind of moral naturalism, the idea that moral values and duties reduce down to facts about the natural world, generally about conscious creatures. Take, for example, humanism, which says that human beings are objectively valuable and bases its ethical imperatives on that explanatory ultimate. Apologists say that atheists don't have any justification for assuming that human beings, or even conscious creatures, are morally valuable, or are objectively valuable. We will hear lines like, on atheism, humans are evolved via accidental, impersonal processes, and so we are no more valuable than any other material object in the universe. The problem with this objection is that atheists can point out that human beings, or more generally, conscious creatures, are more valuable than any other material object because we have relevant differences between us and other material objects that give us our value. One track we can take to argue this point is to point out that on atheism, consciousness is a necessary condition of being able to value anything at all. As such, this makes conscious creatures inherently valuable compared to non-conscious material objects, because they have the ability to value anything at all. Another track we can take is to argue that human beings are morally valuable, is to say that we have a number of special abilities that give us value, the ability to love, to form relationships, to be happy or sad. When we reflect on these qualities, our moral intuitions tell us that there is something special about those qualities, and so those abilities are what gives us value. In his response to my videos on the moral argument, apologist William Lane Craig says that if atheism is true, then things like love are only a chemical process, and as such, he can't see how moral values attach to that. This seems to say that love, or any other mental process, doesn't matter if it boils down to a purely physical process. And this reminds me of this great comic from Saturday Morning Breakfast cereal. So you can see 2 guys, and he says, "I don't believe in love, it's just a bunch of chemical reactions." The person he's with then kicks him in the junk. In the next panel, we see the person exclaiming, "Why?" And the other person simply says, "I don't believe in pain, it's just a chemical reaction." The point here is that even if love was just the result of chemical processes in our brains, this has no bearing on whether or not it matters. It certainly matters to the kinds of beings that are able to value anything at all. Conscious creatures. What I want to point out here is how empty this kind of objection from apologists is. After all, there's no real explanation as to how values attach to God's nature either. Apologists just state that God's nature as their explanatory ultimate for moral values, and that's it. An explanatory ultimate is the stopping point for our explanations about something. An apologist will say that claiming the ability to love or form relationships or to be happy or sad is to be premature in cutting off our explanation as to what gives us our value. Atheists will in turn say that apologists simply add an unnecessary step, namely God, that does no explanatory work. For instance, there's a reason that their metaethical theory is called modified divine command theory, because one of the other bases for value that at least some Christian theologians held to in the past was regular old divine command theory, which said that whatever God commanded was what was good. The modification was saying that whatever a loving God commanded constituted our moral obligations, and that his nature is the basis for moral values. But what exactly is doing the work in this explanation? God or the addition of the word love? In the end, my point here is that the moral argument fails, specifically because atheists can have our own explanatory ultimate for moral values that is no less arbitrary than what apologists hold to as their explanatory ultimate. For more information on this, please check out my other moral argument short on brute facts. Now, apologists may not like our basis for moral values, or find its stopping point premature, but the inverse of that is true for atheists and their moral theory. What they cannot say, however, is that atheists do not have an objective basis for moral values and duties.